Good afternoon, everyone. The recent federal budget plus the pledge to invest millions of dollars in clean technology and innovation in order to drive job creation and Canada's economic recovery. Welcome to this discussion on the benefits those investments can create here in Alberta. I'm Linda Coady. I'm the Executive Director of the Pembina Institute, an independent nonprofit think tank on energy, climate, and the environment, founded 32 years ago by a group of local citizens in Alberta. And it is my pleasure to be your moderator for this event. We are very fortunate to have three really knowledgeable speakers with us today. We will start with some initial remarks by one of them that will be followed by a 30-minute group discussion. But first, we want to acknowledge that we are joining you today from Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territory in Western Canada. We respect the histories, languages, and cultures of the First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all of the First Peoples of Canada. Their presence strengthens our communities, and we are grateful for their stewardship of these lands and waters since before memory. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the Honourable François-Philippe Champagne, Canada's Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. Minister Champagne is responsible for successful implementation of many of the new initiatives in the 2021 federal budget in ways that can help both small and large Canadian businesses alike grow while positioning Canada as a global centre for clean technology and innovation. Welcome, Minister Champagne. Can you please kick off this discussion today with a few words about the measures contained in the recent federal budget and how they're going to increase Canada's share of local and global trade in clean and sustainable technologies and processes? Over to you, Minister.
Well, thank you, Linda. It's a real pleasure to be with you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm pleased to be joining you virtually. You know, there's a special place in my heart for Alberta. I used to preside the BAM Forum and used to go there very often. But it's a real pleasure to be with you. And thank you, Linda. Merci, Linda, for the extraordinary work you're doing and the Pembina Institute. It's a real pleasure to be joining the panel today. And I also want to say thank you to Malcolm, who's going to be joining us in a minute from Edmonton Global, which is really doing important work to bring investments in the city. And I should say hello also to Don Iverson, my good friend, the mayor of Edmonton. And I think Apoorv is going to be joining us for carbon upcycling, an amazing company you're going to hear about. I learned of them today, but I'm sure our viewers will be very interested. I think we would all agree as Canadians that we are having this discussion at a very pivotal moment in our future as humanity, but also as Canada. I would say that even before the pandemic hit Canada, consumer and markets were focusing on low carbon and making sure that consumers would have more access to environmentally sustainable goods. Now we're seeing that around the world, not just in Canada, just in North America, but I would say around the world, we're seeing that more and more countries around the world are making climate change a key priority in order to drive growth and jobs. And I think when you come to talk about the clean tech sector, I think we have enormous opportunities. I think for some of you may have watched not only what was in the federal budget, but what President Biden side of our border announced. I think there are tremendous opportunity. And you may have seen that Prime Minister Trudeau announced recently our renewed commitment to the goal of reducing Canada's greenhouse gas emission by 40 to 45% below 2005 level by 2030. And I think this was well received around the world. I think this is going to really spur a moment of innovation, because if you look at the two biggest crises that the world is facing today, on one hand, you have COVID-19, obviously, and on the other hand, you have climate change. And it's through science, technology, and innovation that we are going to find the breakthrough technology. And I think in that sense, both Edmonton, Alberta, and Canada are certainly very well placed to seize the moment and be really ambitious in this very new market that is being created. So that's why when I look at the last federal budget, I think it's a budget which is really made. I mean, for me, it's a blueprint for jobs and growth. And certainly in the economy of tomorrow, we have made significant investment. You may have seen close to 18 billion to make sure that we'd have a green recovery. And that's good news for small and medium-sized businesses across our nation. Whether it's about tax credit in the R&D funding to support a number of companies which are active across Alberta, or even the billion we've put to support clean technology projects. And I think that with that, I am very, very hopeful to see a lot of opportunities for Alberta to be a leader in the low carbon energy sector. And I think many of the companies or people joining us today will be able to benefit from these measures. The other thing is we put 8 billion to support what I've called a net zero accelerator. It's really companies who can really allow us to become champion on the global stage. So with that, Linda, because I don't want to take too much time, I want to hear from you. The only thing I would say at the very end, I would say, let's seize the moment. I don't think there's never been a better time to be in that sector, actually. The second thing I would say, let's be ambitious because we have everything to be ambitious. We have the talent, we have the innovators, and we know that talent is attracting investments. And the more we can invest in innovation, the more we can support our joint prosperity. And I think let's make together Alberta a powerhouse when it comes to clean technologies. So with that, Linda, hope I did not exceed the time you had allocated for me, but I'll gladly turn over to you and happy to engage with the members of the panel.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you, Minister. We do have, as the Minister mentioned, two other guests here with us today who are going to help us take a closer look at some of the implications and opportunities that these new strategies and investments can create for Alberta-based entrepreneurs, businesses, and workers. So first of all, we have Malcolm Bruce, who is the CEO, as the Minister mentioned, of Edmonton Global. And Edmonton Global is a regional economic development corporation that's a joint venture involving 15 municipalities in the Edmonton region. Edmonton Global is also a member, some of you may know, of a new consortium of groups from government, business, and Indigenous communities that are behind the recent launch of the Edmonton Regional Hydrogen Hub, that is out to position this region for success as the world shifts to a low-carbon future. Launched just a couple of weeks ago, the Edmonton Hub is the first of its kind in Canada and an early mover in a new national strategy aimed at developing a domestic industry that is projected to be worth somewhere between, get this, a whopping 50 to 100 billion a year by 2050. So welcome, Malcolm. And we're also really pleased to have with us here today Apoorv Sinha, founder and CEO of Carbon Upcycling. That's another Alberta-based business that is commercializing a process to convert carbon dioxide emissions into nanoparticles that can act as fillers for concrete, plastics, pharmaceuticals, and batteries. Some of you may know that Carbon Upcycling was recently a finalist in the Global Carbon X Prize. And that's a global competition that challenges the world to reimagine what we can do with carbon dioxide emissions by developing new technologies that can turn them into valuable products. Apoorv is also an alumnus of the Energy Futures Lab. I have to call that out, another homegrown group here in Alberta that many of us know and love. And he's a winner of the Forbes 30 Under 30 Energy Awards and also a member of the board of Alberta Cleantech Industrial Alliance. So Malcolm and Apoorv, thank you for joining us today. And let's get right at it here. Okay, so Minister, how will the investments in the new budget help power Canada's economic recovery and create good jobs here and elsewhere across our country?
Well, the first thing I would start, Linda, and let me say to Apoorv how proud I am to meet you, sir. I read about you and really everyone would win by learning about you. And thank you, Malcolm. I think you and I have seen each other in a previous version of portfolio that I had. I had a number of them, it seems, over the years. So we've seen each other and I know what Edmonton is about. Well, to your question, and I think it starts with talent. The best way that we can do is that Apoorv, I think, is a good example that because of the investments, because of the ecosystem we've been building in Alberta in particular, we are able to aim high when I think in terms of clean technologies. And I think if you look at the budgets, for example, you may have heard that we're going to have about 85,000 what we call work integrated learning opportunities for young people, a bit like the German model. I spent a number of years in Europe, actually in Switzerland, and so that model where you integrate young people into companies to learn and to be able to develop technology. I think part one of our strategy is about skills and making sure that people will get the skills. The other thing is to make sure that we can help the companies to grow, whether it's through our granting council, whether it's through the strategic innovation fund that we have put together. I think we are in a position, and Apoorv, I read what you were doing, and you're changing the world. Actually, believe it or not, that's one of the first things I talked with the Secretary of Commerce in the United States was about how can we reduce carbon in concrete and whether we can have a joint initiative. So you can imagine how excited I was to read about your company and some others across the nation, because if you look, where can we make a difference? It's in the built environment. And this is just an example of I said that in my initial remark. We have, I was with Al Gore on a panel just yesterday. We're saying the world has come to a tipping point. Clearly, all the investments now are going to go in one direction. And I think companies like you, Apoorv, and what Malcolm you're doing, and certainly Linda, Pembina, you've been, for 30 years, you've been telling us what to do. And it's great to see now that companies are championing that. And I think that federal budget is really a budget for innovators, for people who believe in clean technologies and want us to be first in class, and certainly be happy to be a partner with you on that.
Okay, thank you. Malcolm, turning to you, sort of more specifically looking at the Edmonton region, what kind of opportunities do you see these new investments and measures creating there?
Well, there's two I want to highlight. So, Minister, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. The first one is the Pan-Canadian AI strategy. I think, the renewal of investment in that tripartite membership of Toronto, Montreal, and Edmonton in terms of enhancing and reinforcing the leader advantage we currently have in artificial intelligence is key. And I think we all recognize that, whatever sector or technology on a go-forward basis, artificial intelligence and machine learning are going to be key components of that as a go-forward basis. So that $40 million investment was very much appreciated. The Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, which is located in Edmonton, will really net benefit from this, and I think really spur other activities. We see companies now that are taking the kind of knowledge and then applying it into traditional sectors to enhance processes, increase efficiencies, and get far greater outputs from the inputs that they're putting in. And I think the second piece that I would like to highlight is really about the budget allows us to really go forth to an international investor and highlight some of the opportunities for them in terms of attracting more businesses here. So whether that be in the clean tech, be that batteries, nanotechnology, as we've talked about, drug discovery, as you know, we've got a Nobel laureate at the University of Alberta, agriculture, and hydrogen. And I just need to reinforce what the minister says on the hydrogen file. We can produce low-cost, zero-carbon hydrogen at scale here that will substantially help Canada's transition to a low-carbon economy that's not only going to meet Canada's goals, but also the world goals. So I think these are opportunities I think are critical that came out of that federal budget. Thank you.
Okay, some pretty big opportunities there. Apoorv, can Canada, you're in the room on carbon removal, can Canada be a global leader in this area? I know we really want to be, but do you think we can do it?
Yeah, I'll try to be conscious of the length of my response. I think I tend to struggle with that. Firstly, I'll just start by saying, Minister, it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Your name actually came up about 2 weeks ago when I was talking to the Lafarge CEO in Western Canada about just potential collaboration opportunities, and he mentioned how avidly you're looking at supporting these kinds of initiatives. And I think hearing you today is kind of furthering the point that Brad was making a few days ago. I'll start firstly, Linda, by answering something that the minister touched on in terms of why Alberta might be well placed in this transition. I moved here 10 years ago. I've been an immigrant. Like, I moved to North America for my undergrad studies to the US, and then came here about 11 years ago to Canada, specifically Calgary. And I definitely think that some of the opportunities that I've been presented professionally are possibly singularly possible only here in Alberta and in Calgary. And I think that that's pretty exciting. I think the province has really taken to heart some of the transitions that we want to be a poster child for. And given the fact that so much of our prosperity has come from oil and gas, and a lot of the skill sets and experience that we've built in that, both engineering and technically, but also from a management of capital perspective, I think a lot of that can translate to this world of atoms that we need to change, whether it comes to construction, energy, things like hydrogen and other things that Malcolm talked about. And within that, I think I just wanted to make the point of how critical, if we are going to achieve this goal of what you talked about in carbon removal, Linda, I think the importance of ambition and signaling from the federal and provincial governments is more critical than ever. We know that the battle of climate change isn't going to be won within the borders of Canada. Like, we just don't have enough population here to be able to change, what major players like India, China, and others do. But what we have the ability to do, and it kind of ties into what you said about Switzerland earlier, Minister, we can be the example that shows people how things can be done differently. And I think one of the things that gets me excited about what we've been able to do over the last couple of years is we have now scaled a commercial demonstration unit that's selling low carbon products into the industry today, as of just 5 weeks ago. And we've convinced some of the most technically advanced companies like Lafarge, Burnco, and others that what we're doing is actually real. Like, that is something that, usually takes decades in an industry which has been using the same chemistry for almost 200 years. But the fact that we've been able to do this is because there is enthusiasm in the marketplace. That's as much what we have done as it is the market being interested in what we're doing, and being able to get that signal from folks like the minister so that these companies know that this is the future now. Like, there's no turning back. The carbon tax isn't going away. The kind of policies that we need for a green transition are here today. I think these are very, very important signals. And just in the last 3 months, we've seen the conversation change. We've seen people say, no longer are we going to worry about, what happens if someone, gets elected here or what not. Like, now the conversation is, what do we do to accelerate something that is inevitable? And I'm pretty excited about that. And I'll just finish by saying one last piece, which is that, as the policymakers, you can kind of, I think, draw an analogy to generals in a battlefield. Like, they see the whole picture. They have the ability to move a lot of different resources. And, me as a startup entrepreneur, like, I see myself as kind of the soldier on the ground, kind of seeing just the real kind of tactical piece of the battle. And within that, I think there's a lot of value to be gained to have conversations between us and policymakers, because a lot of times us, venture capital investors, big institutional money, they're not seeing the reality on the ground the way people like us see them. And I'm not trying to, vouch for conversations here if they're useless, but I do believe that a better bridge in that communication with the ecosystem right at that in the trench level is something that could really help the whole ecosystem be more efficient.
Okay, so the importance of ambition and signaling and a stable policy environment. Okay, back to you, Minister, then. Just picking up on what Apoorv said about the skills and capacities of Alberta's traditional resource-based industries, and equally important, the whole value chain of service companies in those sectors. How do you see them being part of this transition moving forward, particularly in relation to fast-forwarding industrial decarbonization, both at home and abroad? What is their role going to be?
First of all, Linda, let me just say, now you understand why I'm so insistent on talent. I think we would all want to see 1,000 Apoorv in Canada to be, I don't see you as a soldier, I see you as the battlefield commander. I often say that I have to make battlefield decisions, but I feel we're in the same front, I must say, because it's amazing what you've been doing and your energy. That's why we need people like you. That's why it starts with talent. We could bring you from the United States and stay in Canada. What better example it is that we can attract people. And then allow me to say to Malcolm, so happy, Malcolm, you mentioned AI and what we can do in hydrogen. I come from the natural resources sector in many ways. So for me, this is music to my ear when I heard that. And believe it or not, I was talking to a big company recently, and the two things they told me, believe it or not, in a different sector, not even in the clean tech sector, but they said, Minister, would you have enough talent to fuel our growth? And can we plug into your AI sector? And that was a biotech company. Amazing to me. They did not even ask for money, Linda, believe it or not. They said, just show me that you have enough talent to make sure that we can grow, and if you can plug into your AI sectors. And the point to your question more specifically, Linda, is that what I think we're seeing, and Malcolm said it in great terms, is that AI will have an impact on all the industries. So obviously, all the SMEs around the change that we're going to see are going to benefit from that. I think we are also making a turning point when it comes to digitization of companies. And I think quantum computing, I think AI, that's really the future that's going to have an impact on all industries. So it's not just like a sector-specific plan for growth and jobs. I think what we're seeing in Alberta, what we're seeing in Edmonton and Calgary, what we're seeing across Canada is that now, my job, and I would say our job, is to make sure that we invest in the job of today, to make sure that we create some, we preserve some, but in the industry of tomorrow, that we see 20 years, 30 years from now. And there's something about intergenerational equity in that. When we invest today, we have to make sure that this is in the future. And I think that with that, we will need a strong support industries. The type of companies you talk about will have a big role to play, because companies like Apoorv, they're not just looking at Canada. They're just not looking at Alberta. I think, Apoorv, you're looking at conquering the world with your new technology. And when you think that Canada now has preferential market access to 1.3 billion consumers around the world through our trade agreement, the only G7 country which has a free trade agreement with all the others, companies like you, Apoorv, can really lead the world, because you have the talent, you have the expertise, and you have the market access. And certainly we'll be happy to support you. And trust me, I'll be on the back of the Lafarge to make sure this gets done, because I've been talking to them, and I'm adamant that we will reduce the carbon footprint of cement. They know I'll be on their back, but they've been a great partner, and we'll continue to work with them in the industry.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Lafarge is going to have some additional wind in their wings here, obviously. Malcolm, okay, thinking about that industrial supply chain, value chain, all those great service companies in Alberta, can you give a few examples of local companies that are mobilized to move into this space, take advantage of some of the technological shifts now disrupting markets for energy, but also, as you mentioned at the beginning of your remarks, other products?
Absolutely. And Minister, I only wish we had a couple of hours so I could go through a very broad range of companies that are really sort of what I would say looking to the future, but also looking to the value add down the supply chain. And that's really where I think we can make some significant changes and differences to our global competitiveness and our ability to compete on a global marketplace, because we've got product that the rest of the world wants. We just need to be more aggressive, and as you indicated, with more ambition. So in the food and ag tech space, I just look at pulses. So we're very good at meat proteins. We're the largest exporter of pulses in the world, and yet we're exporting basically the raw product. So the faster we can sort of add to the value, whether that be pulse fractionation or in terms of starches and the byproducts that come out of these facilities, the better off we'll be. So we've got companies like Nabi Foods and BioNutra who are taking some of these raw products out of the pulses and making them into viable food products that we're shipping around the world. And I think part of the great things that we have in this region is our connectedness globally, particularly on the air bridge through our airport, through the circumpolar routes to Asia, but also our unimpeded connectedness through places like Prince Rupert and Vancouver, which really give us a very rapid proximity to, as you indicated, large segments of the global population that are great for our markets. But just three companies that I want to highlight that have raised $70 to $80 million in the last few months. One is EcoQuest, which is an oncology company. One is DriveWise, which is all around the driver technology and the like. And the third one is, most recently, was Jobber, which is a company that helps digitize the small SMEs workforce. So if you're a plumber, you want to do it. So these are three companies that really sort of driving the application of new technologies into what could be considered some of those traditional fields. So all in all, I think there's a lot of bright spots in the ecosystem here. And as you've probably heard, I mean, the most recent reports is Alberta's now got upwards of just over 3,000 tech companies now that have really grown by a third over the last just 2 or 3 years. So it's exciting to be part of that ecosystem.
3,000 tech companies growing and continuing to grow even during the pandemic, Malcolm. That's impressive. Okay, Apoorv, back to you. Can you just reflect a bit, and say something about the skills and resources that help you get to where you are today, as well as the ones you're going to need to stay there and compete in what has to be an ever more competitive marketplace?
Yeah, quite honestly, Linda, I don't think it's competitive enough, frankly. I think that if you look at how many carbon tech solutions, we picked on Lafarge a lot, so I'll take it one more step here. How many companies can Lafarge call today for a commercial solution? If the minister or someone else calls them and says they want something that's 30, 40% better than what they do today, do they have people they can call? And the honest answer to that is that they don't have that many people they can call. And I think there needs to be, as someone who trained as an engineer, I'm hoping to see considerably more competition in that space than there is today. But I do think that the question about talent is a really important one. And especially in the last year, we had a very tough year in 2020 with using a very small team in Calgary, getting our commercial demonstration up and running through COVID, the lockdowns, and also having a couple of other challenges in the field, as you tend to do when you're scaling up major equipment. And one of the things I realized is, I've always been kind of the opinion that talent isn't as important as skill and perseverance. If you have that learning attitude where you can learn from the mistakes and have that perseverance to be out there fighting that fight again the next day, there's a lot to be said for that. And I'm honestly kind of buoyed that the young team that we have here in town has kind of proven me right. They've given me a few case studies. 3 of the team members that helped us through becoming the runners-up on the Carbon X Prize, they were 22 years old when they started. A couple of them, when we started the company, couldn't drink, even in Canada, let alone the States, where the drinking age is a little higher. And the fact that they've now become critical cogs, they're able to take conversations with companies like Cemex or Lafarge or Argos and actually hold their own in those conversations is something that I frankly feel very proud of, because at that time, you don't look at a 19-year-old and say, that's talent that we need to look at from a policy perspective necessarily. You're looking at, very skilled, kind of high quality professional talents, perhaps. And I've kind of looked at my role as the CEO to be allocating both financial as well as personal, human capital, in a way that is effective in helping us achieve these goals. And I think to the minister's point earlier about, us wanting to conquer the world, frankly, back maybe 4 or 5 years ago when I was a little more bullish, I probably would have said that just because of ego. But I think right now, I would say more from a grounded realization that companies like us and many others that are from Canada, they need to be able to do this so that we change behaviors. If we're going to meet the ambitious climate targets we have for 2030, 2050, we have to be able to go and convince not just the Canadian government, but players in India, in Indonesia, Poland, Germany, companies in the red belt in the US, that this is a new way of doing business that makes sense now and will only make more sense with time. And I think some of the most gratifying things for us has been that we've been able to start seeing this paradigm shift already happen. The conversations we're having with folks 6 months ago are very different to what we're having in the last 2 to 3 months. And I'm actually, hopeful that we're able to get the resources that we need to build this team out. We're very aggressively kind of working towards executing that plan. And I'll just finish by one last thing about ambition. That's one thing that I absolutely wanted to share with the audience, as well as with the minister and folks like you, Linda, who have been working in this NGO space, as the minister said, fighting the good fight for way longer than we can remember. I think that there's, already some decent precedents. Back after the First World War, Vannevar Bush in the States started the Office of Scientific Research and Development and basically came up with major technologies like radar and others that helped the Allies win the Second World War. And that has now evolved into ARPA-E and DARPA, and a lot of the things like the internet, the Bell Labs work, the Xerox Labs in San Francisco, the core fundamental innovations came out of that. And I think within the climate sphere, Canada could very easily allocate a thing like resources towards that kind of a plan and be extremely ambitious and solve not all, but potentially a significant chunk of the world's problems from within the border. And I would love to talk about that with anyone who's interested, because I think that's the kind of thing that gets us excited about having a realistic chance of meeting our goals.
Yeah, and I think we're already seeing the U.S. remobilize around those ideas again, Apoorv. So under the Biden administration, and they're definitely putting a lot of focus and dollars behind that kind of thinking and those kinds of groups within government. So, Minister, back to you one more time here. The new budget contains tax cuts, as you mentioned, expenditure write-offs and credits for all kinds of clean technologies, solar panels, electric buses, green hydrogen, carbon capture and storage. So are you pretty confident that these are the right acupuncture points? Like, how are you making these decisions strategically around which technologies to get behind to help advance the role of companies and sectors in Alberta?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you, Linda. And again, so inspiring to hear you, Apoorv. And you make our job, Malcolm and I, very easy. I would say Linda was at the forefront of bringing the world there, but you make our job easy. I listen to you, and I would spend an hour listening just to make sure that we can support you the best way possible. But to your point, Linda, I think yes, I think that there's a couple of things that governments can do. I mean, you mentioned some of the investments, but some other things that we're going to do. For example, government can play a big difference when it comes to procurement. And for example, setting standards. We have this green government initiative with the United States. How can we use our tax dollar in order to drive adoption of clean tech? How can we be early adopters of some of the technologies that we have there? The standard is one. I mean, Apoorv, we mentioned about cement, and I would say Lafarge has been a good partner because I reached out and they said, yes, Minister, we'll talk about that. That's the type of thing that governments can do with businesses, obviously, to drive the ecosystem and to make sure that we provide a platform for companies like the one that Apoorv is leading. And so I think on one side you have investments. On the other side, I think about home retrofits. I mean, we've seen that time and time again. This is playing a big difference. The investment we did, I remember I was Minister of Infrastructure when we talk about the LRT in Edmonton. Investing in public transit, investing in renewable energy. We know that the world is going to consume more energy. How do we make the transition to greener energies? And Malcolm mentioned it. We're talking about CCUS. And the great thing in Alberta is that we have the people. We have the people. We have the talent. We have the expertise. Apoorv came north because he knew that there were people who could support him in that, because we have the basic talent to make that energy transition. And you mentioned, for example, Malcolm, the blue hydrogen. Is there something that we know about gas in Canada? Obviously, how can we turn that now in blue hydrogen? We know that we have the experts, we have the people. So it is for us now to provide the opportunities. You all know that there's interesting projects looking at the province. And I want to say a shout out also to Doug Schweizer, my colleague in Alberta, and Premier Coady. We've been looking at a number of projects, and you trust me, we'll be alongside you at every step of the way, because I'm a big believer. Once you have the talent, once you have the expertise, and once you have the ambition, nothing can stop us. And so I am more bullish than ever as to the potential of Edmonton, of Alberta, and Canada when it comes to Cleantech and setting the new standard in the world. The world has taken a turn, and we saw it. You said it, Linda. Those of you who have listened, President Biden in the State of the Union address, I think it was 2 or 3 days ago, you've stated we are on a path, and what we need to do now, it's a race to the top. And I want to make sure that with you, we are at the top, and then we can lead in a transformation which comes once in a generation. So back to you, Linda.
Okay. No, this is the moment for sure. Malcolm, under the leadership of Don Iveson and many other community leaders in your part of the province, Edmonton has established itself as a recognized leader in the global movement for sustainable cities. In your experience, does sustainability leadership at the municipal level translate into business opportunities that this region might not have otherwise had without that kind of leadership?
Investors are looking at the ESG and sort of sustainability in most of their decision makings that they're making nowadays. So you need to be able to understand their context for investments in order to make sure that you're able to put your best foot forward, so to speak. And there are many leaders, I think, in Alberta that I think sometimes people forget. Alberta was one of the first movers many years ago to put carbon tax on large emitters. They were also, if you look at our oil and gas companies, something up the neighborhood of 84% have publicly stated they're going to go to net zero by 2050. And if you put that in comparison to US-based companies, which is more along the 30% mark. So there are a number of companies that are here in the traditional sectors that recognize the need to move to that direction. Our airport, if you're not aware, just declared that they are going to be net zero by 2050. First airport globally to do so. So they have now set the marker down with Unilever and a number of other big companies to say they're going net zero. The University of Alberta has just been named one of the most sustainable universities globally, and our municipalities, led by Don Iveson, has moved ESG and sustainability as one of their core values. And these things matter to companies as well when they're dealing with politicians, as you know, because decisions are made in conjunction and in partnership with each other. And then finally, there's a couple of companies here that I think everybody knows. Stantec is one of the world leaders in ESG and sustainability, and they are 22,000 strong and headquartered out of Edmonton. So there are a number of key examples to show that ESG and sustainability are here to stay, and they're part of the everyday decision-making cycle that companies are going through today.
Right, and they should be an edge in attracting capital. So, Apoorv, last one to you. We've mentioned President Biden a few times here, and we all heard at his climate summit 2 weeks ago that he wants the US to achieve a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And Prime Minister Trudeau now wants Canada to reduce our emissions by anywhere between 40 to 45% during that same time period. But, we've set targets before that we haven't met here in Canada on emissions reduction. So can it be different this time around? Will these investments make it different? What's going to happen, Apoorv? Can we do it this time?
I hope so. If I didn't believe so, I wouldn't be getting up here and trying to be involved as much as I am. I think a couple of things that come to mind, like, a lot of the work around artificial intelligence that Alberta and Edmonton in particular has led. There was that article by Mark Andresen from the Valley about the world of atoms versus the world of bits. And I think Alberta has already kind of established itself at a global level as being one of the leaders in machine learning and artificial intelligence. I think it's very buoyant to see how much of the fight of the world of atoms we're picked on as well. You look at Portland cement, like that was invented back in 1824. So in 2 years, it'll be 200 years old, and no one has come up with something new, at least in a way that has actually been commercialized. You look at, technologies like plastics, like most of the ethylene crackers and the plastics we buy from a grocery store or a dollar store, most of those haven't changed fundamentally in over 40 or 50 years. And so there is a lot of inertia that's involved in this, and the challenge is very large. I don't think that, the efforts in the past have failed because of a lack of intent. I genuinely think that they've just struggled because it is such a big challenge, and so much of it is not so much about allocation of capital, but the execution that people can show with that money or with the resources, personnel and otherwise. And I think that's where I'm pretty excited about what we can do within Canada and within the scope of Alberta. I think that there is a lot of energy, and I think, again, I'll go back to the importance of ambition. I think the minister said it right at the start. Like, I don't necessarily think that, President Biden doing what he's doing necessarily seals the deal on them being the front runners in this. Like, resources are one thing, allocation is quite another. And ultimately, it's going to boil down to getting, I would say that there's many people who know me, the minister, who would not want another 1,000 of me around. But I do think that, generally speaking, kind of passionate entrepreneurs and ecosystem players like, incubators, accelerators, people that work in social ventures, people that work in kind of entities that facilitate the success of these entrepreneurs is just as important as the entrepreneur itself. And I think that overall ecosystem, I think all of the energy that has come from, the energy system in Alberta kind of going sideways recently, that's all being channeled towards this. And with the right signaling from the government and from the private capital sources, I think this could be really refined and honed in a very exciting way. And I just feel very grateful to be a part of it. So thank you for that. And thank you for the platform here as well.
Okay, well, a big thank you to all three of you, Minister Champagne and Malcolm and Apoorv, for giving us lots to think about. I'm just going to sum it up by saying we need ambition matched with human and financial capital and a capacity to execute and leverage Alberta's existing assets and competencies. So on that note, media contact information is available in the news release that's been prepared for this event. Thank you everyone for joining us. Stay safe and have a good weekend. Bye.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Minister.